We should all start like that.
Yes, we should. I can't
We
tell
should
what
start like that because we are live.
we are live.
We are live.
Indeed,
live.
live
Oh my-
on
Hang on, let me
the
check the
tube
pulse.
of you.
Yeah, I can detect something. Not sure what it is.
Something's happening there. I don't. Yeah.
So here we are on KTLO, keeping the learning on. Keeping the learning on.
Leon, yes.
Keeping the,
We really have to practice the jingle. Sorry, Roy.
It's on. I'm just not sure about the learning right now.
Right. Well, we're learning.
We are learning. Yeah,
We
exactly.
are learning.
That's the thing. Good morning, Patty. How are you
Good.
up there in the Great White North?
I'm doing great. How are you all?
Very well, thank you. And Gregory, how are you?
Whoa. Greg is excellent today.
That's good.
Yeah.
we're good.
It's been a good week.
It's so cool when things go wrong and happy and we're live. But anyway, we're live. So there.
Well, it's beautiful Friday up here. We're looking for blue skies and sunshine. I like that.
There you go. You can have some blue sky.
There we go. Thank you.
Right. Blue. Yes.
Ask
So-
and ye shall receive.
Today, last week we had the fork in the road, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things we talked about was there's really not one fork. There are many forks, perhaps an infinite number of forks, like some of the drawers in my kitchen.
Is that like a fork tool?
It
Where
could be
there's-
a fork doll. A fork doll. Yes.
Pound sign fork tool.
Yes, because Julia left a set of fork. Never mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's
And they're not
do-
matching forks either, are they?
It's
No.
Friday. Do I have
Yeah.
to do math?
That's my line.
Yeah.
So
Ah.
perhaps we find ourselves at that fork in the road and we decide to proceed. And off we go. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because that's what we decided we were going to talk about today.
Yeah.
If you're tuning in for the first time on YouTube, this is a discussion that's been going on for months and months and months and months and months and months. We decided to open it up during our period of happiness here in 2020. It shall be referred to as the period of happiness. from now
Yes.
They'll get
And,
happier.
It's not formal. It's not a webinar. It's not anything that we know of.
We
Like,
can't.
we never know what it's going to be from one week
Doesn't
to the
really
next.
have a name. It's
No.
just
It's
we're
just
getting
a
together.
conversation.
It's a conversation. It is a conversation about things that we're going through, that some other people are going through, and what we think about all of that, and so on. So here we are, and we decided on the adventurer's journey and not the hero's journey.
Mm.
One of the things you may notice about this little gathering is that half of us are a gender, and the other half are the other gender.
Which was
another
purely by
gender.
accident, actually.
Which actually
Yes,
neutralizes us and we just become gender neutral.
We are indeed gender neutral, which is
we
right
can become
between
whatever you want us to become.
it's right between second and third on the floor. No, never mind. That's gearhead talk.
Yes.
Mhm.
So here we are, and we're going to discuss this phenomenon, which has been written about and written about and written about and spoken about, and what the adventurer's journey is and what it represents. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and see if we can puzzle through whether or not we want to go on the journey. This is who we are, by the way. A little bit about us. Perhaps just a brief introduction from everybody. Let's start with Patty.
Sure. I live in Canada and hooked up with these crazy people. Well, I met Roy 10 years ago, I think, or more, and kind of got involved with some cool conversations. What I do up here is try to connect humanity with technology. That's my big purpose, is to really put humanity back into the focus of business and through change and transformation. So that's what
Nice.
I do.
Greg.
Greg?
Oh, Greg's next, right?
Grigori.
So my path started from the entry level answering help desk calls for technical products for a large corporation. Moved in up through the ranks of various levels of responsibility within technology and as a technologist, and found myself as the CIO of a state agency. And along that journey, I spent an awful lot of time in the world of what we now call service management, or really focusing in on how do we deliver value to our customers. And what I've learned is that when you land in the CIO's seat, your perspective on all of that really changed. My responsibility is to inspire excellence in people, to get the best out of them, to create an environment in which they can be excellent and grow and develop and make mistakes and pursue value for our customers. And so my view of service management and what its role is versus culture and human development and engagement has really changed quite a lot. And so that has me moving in some really interesting spots, including this conversation right here.
Master Roy, it's your turn.
It's my turn?
Yeah.
We won't go into my background, and the reason we won't go into my background is we only have an hour. That's
also,
simple.
there's that court order thing, but
did a background check on me. It took them 10 years. Anyway, I work as an industry analyst and writer and podcaster and all kinds of things like that. Very much into the IT service management world, but that's not my sole focus nor my education. So I'll talk about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you're a resident philosopher and psychologist.
Oh dear.
Well, as you can see by my photograph, I'm ready to travel. I'm off on an adventure, which is how this started. It was... Okay, Grigori is doing his Irish thing. And
Greg is muted. Where are you right now, Simone? Why are you not answering me?
Right, there you are on the beach.
All the time. If you want the official stuff, look at LinkedIn. That's the easiest thing you can do. I'm not going to go through my history on that, but just some of the fun stuff. Yeah, I started my career in the Army. That was pretty cool, and that's where I fell in love with a whole lot of interesting different tech as well. When I finally got out, that sounds like a sentence. That's terrible. When I finally left the services, and when I got out, I ended up in all sorts of companies and industries. I started in the business side, not from IT, sales, marketing, customer service, managing call centers, and all that kind of cool stuff. But really, that whole where I'm at right now, I really am more of a mixologist, because taking from all the different industries I've worked in, different types of roles, I love a lot of the frameworks we have, but there is no one to rule them all. So I like to mix the cocktails. That's why I call myself a bit of a mixologist. And I'm very much into looking at the EI of AI. I'm really curious about all that stuff on the emotional intelligence and how we're looking to meld that into our technology world. But as Patty said, we cannot go there without the H2H component. We need the human to human. So that's my really big thing, connecting people, sharing the knowledge. By doing that, we can actually then discover, make discoveries, what the possibilities are, and eventually our potential is realized. So that's kind of a snapshot.
Nice.
There you go.
So within the framework of the adventurer's journey, there are lots of journeys under discussion right now. Let's say we have the customer journey. We talk about that with customer experience. Let's do some customer journey mapping. And then we have the employee journey, which these days is not very far. Across
how
the
far
hall.
is your commute to work?
Right, 20 seconds.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some interesting phenomena around that. But one of the things, just as a sidebar, just one of the things that I read this morning was that people are working something like 3 hours more than they were before they were sent home. And there's lots of reasons for that. Lots and lots of reasons, because they have to make room in their day, perhaps for their children and homeschooling and all the other things that are going on. One thing people are not doing is sitting in traffic for 2 hours outside of Los Angeles on their way to work. So
Yeah.
there's that balance. But and anyway, the quote that we pulled up here is, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step, which of course comes from Lao Tzu. And so what do we think about before we take our first step? We're at that fork in the road that we talked about last time. What do we think about before we take that step? What's going through our heads, and what are some of the things that we use to decide which direction we're going to go, and whether we take that step backwards away from the fork in the road, or whether we go forward, and do we pick a direction, or what happens?
It depends if there's a pothole.
Yeah.
and it could be a little pothole, or it could be the Grand Canyon.
I think the reason that this quote, this has been another one that has stuck with me for decades, but I think the reason that this quote is important to me is not just that it's true, but that you're not on the journey until you take that first step.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of times in our careers and our growth and development, we analyze, we gather information, we seek advice, and we do so many things, but it's only when you start taking a step that you've actually started your journey. And so to me, there's a big difference between saying, wow, that's an interesting road, that's a fascinating road. I think that road could be really, really beneficial. And I think that in my personal experience, and I'm not a coach, and I wouldn't even try to play one on TV, even not on a YouTube broadcast, but I find a lot of coaches are very keen to ask you questions that essentially cause you to take a step, any step, move in a direction. And I think that's the brilliance of this quote.
I think the thing that stops people from taking that step is fear, and the only thing that shuts fear down is just action, just making yourself do it, push through it. No, I don't think anyone who jumps into something new. Like, I remember when we started our business, I left a large multinational corporation, and when I first started the business, I had a few people say, "Oh my God, you're so courageous," and I'm like, "No, I just walked out the door like it was." I just did something, right? I just I made the effort to incorporate, and had an idea and used that idea, and I just took action on the idea. But it wasn't courage. I think it was more just action drove the ability to keep continuing down a path.
Yeah, just doing something, whatever that something is, that definitely is taking the step. And and it isn't necessarily iterative either. It's not like, okay, take one step and then we take another. Sometimes we've got to take a step and then have another look around, and then take another step and then have a look around again. I mean, it's not necessarily just blindly running along the road, although sometimes that can get you to interesting places as well.
And I've also observed in life that there's a lot of people, and maybe just like more of a personality type, that they want a written guarantee. If I take this step, I'm going to land right here, and that seems worth it to me. In other words, I think we've lost a little bit. There's your quote: "Not all who wander are lost." And wow, thanks for bringing that up. This is exactly right. It's like there's this feeling that if you're not on a directed, I know exactly where I'm going in every step that I'm going to take, that I must be lost. And lost is equal, especially in career and life. It feels a little bit like failure, feels a little bit like waste and bad and all sorts of negativity, as opposed to a way of finding something that you may not have known existed.
Yeah, there's great discovery in that, right?
Yeah.
It's the discovery that lands you to in the areas that you find the most joy and the most fulfillment from, I think.
And there's business application here too as well, right?
Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
Management by what? Wandering around.
Walking around.
and management by walking around, depending on who you quote.
I've seen managers who wonder what's happening. So management by wondering what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
That was a joke.
Wow. Cue the laughter.
that was you describing your management style, Greg?
No,
that
I'm not going to tell you whose management style it was, but I've personally witnessed it.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of internal self-talk and self-image that goes on. I mean, for me, I've said it in the previous episode, for me, the journey is a whole bunch of adventures strung together. It's not just one adventure. There's all this stuff that happens, and look, there's dangers, there's surprises, there's temptation, there's a whole host of things, which is why sometimes I think it's good not so much to take stock. I've never liked auditing. Not so much to take stock, but just sometimes it's just to look around and go, oh, check that view out, and you might find yourself just branching off for a little bit and coming back, or even taking a new road as a result of that.
So Simone, put up your background of your studio, and I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
You have artistic endeavors, and the other two are just glad I'm not picking on them. But you have artistic endeavors that involve you doing things with a paintbrush or colors, or right there.
There you go.
So my question for you is, there's a blank piece of canvas up there at some point in time, and you've got to go over here to your tools of the trade and put something on a blank page. What's the process? What's going on in your mind? Because here's what I think is, what if I put the wrong color on there? What if I put a blotch on there that I can't correct? What if I want to fix ... And you remember everybody's favorite artist, Bob Ross, who says there's no mistakes. There's just happy little whatever he calls
happy
it.
accidents, we call them.
Happy little accidents. That's it. So tell me the process. Like, what does that look like?
Well, the process is different because I work very, very much on the emotional level. In Australia, I used to run what we called artist healing workshops, and we would everything from kids right through. But I'd have executives. I've done stuff for team building and stuff with the arts. And really, so just there's the blank canvas. Think of it this way: there is the space, right? There's just space. And it actually takes over your whole vision, because that's all you're seeing is that space. And for me, that space really beckons to me. It's like begging me just to make that first stroke. Mm-hmm. And I'm not kidding. It's just like begging me to put something on it. And to tell you the truth, the canvas itself, it doesn't care if it's bold or soft or dark or light. The canvas really doesn't care about that. It's just waiting. It's waiting for you to let go. It's just waiting for you to become. It's just waiting for that energy of your soul to be released.
Wow.
That's the blank canvas for me. And whatever is created out of that, it's perfectly fine.
It calls, just do something and try. And I think though that, Greg, you touched on something there that was a really key learning when I was painting in my early tries. And that was, I learned that I could just paint over a canvas.
Yes. Oh, I didn't like the best feeling,
right? Yeah. It was like, hold on a minute. I did this huge painting of horses, and I didn't like how they were turning out. And I just took gesso and painted right over the horses and redid them. And I think that in life, that's something that we have to know. You have a vision of a painting too, and when you're painting, it's a really good metaphor for life, because you think you know what you want it to look like at the end, but your eye hand doesn't do what's in your head all the time. No. And so when you get to the end, you look at it and you go, yeah, and then you put it away for 2 weeks.
And the interesting thing about
vision.
It exactly right.
And you bring it back, and it's like, oh, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah. And do you know, this was the interesting thing through this process, and I think this is part of what we do in our work and our roles too, is, we practice. You just do and keep doing, because in using the creativity of that, whether it's because we're trying to problem solve, coming up with other innovations, whatever that is. When I was painting, as I kept doing it, I just started to become a little braver. You know, and rather than sort of coloring inside the lines, you get braver just to be more abstract. And so I started playing more with that. You start to get more, you know, I madly went through old drawings, old photographs, anything that gave me inspiration. And I think the same happens for me when I'm at work. I go through and think about the other places I've worked. What were the situations? What might I have done differently? How would I paint that canvas now if I, you know, knowing what I know now? And I'm not talking about the hindsight stuff. I'm using that as that going forward. What kind of adventure might this bring me? And
it's like you've learned techniques, right? So there are techniques that you can bring forward in everything you do, and there's a way you've addressed it or learned something or managed something, just like an art technique where you say, oh, I didn't know that about leaves before. My leaves were all crappy before, but now my leaves are getting better because I learned a leaf technique. Well, it's the same in life. It's the same in business. It's the same when you're just at home with your family. You parenting, you know, you learn these techniques that you carry forward with you, and
once you learn it, you can adapt it, you can break it, you can go off into something else. I mean, I'm sure there are colors that have not been created yet.
Oh, of course.
So you triggered on something I think is kind of cool. One of the reasons that Roy and I kind of synced up intellectually, if I can say that, is because Roy has such a broad background, as he alluded to, and is one of those people that can say, you know, I won't name a philosopher because I'll screw it up, but you know, this philosopher thought this, and this scientist did that, and this person in this company did this, and together here's a theme or here's an application of that. So taking these disparate pieces of knowledge or observations or things we've learned in life and apply them to the situation that's in front of us, I think is one of those skills that help us along in the journey.
Dolan Ram, man. Dolan Ram.
I was going to say can't, but you know, but I just can't name a philosopher. So
I can. His name's Roy. Sitting right beside you.
So I put a quote up on the screen, and it's from our present companion here, Patty.
She says smart things a lot.
This came out week before last, maybe, Patty?
I think so, yeah.
May not know where I'm going to end up, but I know who I want to be when I get there, which I think is just an amazing description of one of these journeys, right? You choose a fork. We've said you may wind up wandering for a while, but who cares? You start down the fork and you don't know where you're going to end up, but there's a reason you chose that fork, and you carry part of that with you. And that's a very interesting way to put it. I love that quote. So I thank you for saying that.
Well, thank you.
And then we have this one, which is probably an African proverb. I couldn't find any really good material that said where it came from. It's been quoted as an African proverb many times, and there's some evidence that in fact is, but not one specific country. We don't know. Travel fast, go alone. To travel far, go together. And that, so the adventurer doesn't have to be solo. No. Historically, if we look back at traditional literature and we look through all the epics, and you know, right back to Gilgamesh and some of the early stuff, and then through the classics, which I'll talk a little bit more later on, we find generally it's a male hero going out to do something, you know, changing that paradigm, but to travel far, go together, and I think that's some of what we're learning. And we're in this situation now where in many cases, or maybe even most cases, we're alone in our spaces. We're at home. We're away from our colleagues. We're away from our workplace. We are alone traveling down this road. And yet we've luckily, if we think about how lucky we are to have this kind of technology, to have all the technologies at our disposal that we can connect with each other, see each other's faces, be together in real time, if there is real time. I'll just throw that one out.
It's a construct.
No, real time is Eastern time zone for those of you who are in other times. Anyway, But we can go together and we can go far. So we can do both of these at the same time, right? We're lucky in that we're connected.
You know, you talked about some epics, some epic stories, and in every epic story, you see a number of different types of character development. So even though you've got a hero, you will have, in most really great stories, a mentor, somebody who is guiding that hero somewhere. You also will have the surprise champions, the people who don't look like they're going to be in the least bit helpful, but they show up. And they show up in ways that are epic in and of the action themselves to get that hero forward. And if we remember those stories and we remember that kind of character development, no hero in any great story ever gets anywhere by themselves. And being willing to let go of how you thought it should be or who you think you should be in it, and moving forward with that belief that you're allowed to ask for help, that makes a huge difference in each and every adventure we take in our lives.
Yeah. And
especially hindsight will tell us that, right?
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons that when we were sort of talking about, you know, in naming these little episodes, for us, it's not really about, it's really about the intent, what it is that we want to sort of carry through and what we want to chat about. And I think that was why the reason we came to the point that we didn't want this to be talked about as the hero's journey. We wanted this to be talked about as the adventurer's journey. And that to me is really critical because that includes whoever this person is, whether it might be the person that has to do the specific task, or whether it's the supporting person that's going to help them get there, or whether it's the philosopher whispering in their ear. You know, I think being an adventurer, there's certain characteristics. It doesn't mean that you're not afraid. It doesn't mean that you don't have misgivings. I think that's a pretty critical part of taking that adventure and wandering out into the big vast spaces.
I'm going to make a frame this as maybe as a question. There really isn't one specific type of hero's journey that's represented in the epics. There are two. One is the story that just about everybody is familiar with in one way or another, whether reading books or reading movies, seeing movies based on this story. It's Odysseus, right?
Yeah.
Who leaves home to go to war and is gone for years and years and years. It's 10 years of war followed by 10 years of being lost all over the place and different islands and characters and interventions by gods and goddesses and all of that good stuff. And eventually gets back to faithful wife Penelope. The other one is hooked in with that literarily because so much of the Roman civilization comes out of the Greek, and you have the Aeneid. And Aeneas is supposedly this character who is involved in the Trojan War as well, and also suffers these trials and tribulations on the way out of that war. But instead of going back to someplace in a big cycle, coming back to home, having accomplished all these things or done all these different things and had all these adventures, in fact, arrives to found a new city, which is Rome. So there's the adventurer's journey that comes back. And there's the adventurer's journey that goes someplace new. And I think that we find ourselves right now in the midst of all of the stuff that is going on in our world right now is that we don't know which one of those it is.
Right.
We don't know if we're going to get back to, or some people would wish to get back to normal, whatever that means. But are we really going someplace new? And I'm just throwing that out as a.
Well, do you know what I think our careers do that too, or the different roles that we might take on as in whatever circumstance might happen. You know, certainly I can honestly say that since joining the Army, I don't think home had to be wherever I was. Home had to be, I had to create it from wherever I was. So there's still inside me, we say, oh, you know, I'm talking to home today. And when I say that, I'm just referring to Australia in sense, you know, I'm talking to my mom or my family, whatever. So I say, I'm talking to home. But that's actually not quite true. It's where I came from. It's integral to the way I feel and think, absolutely. But that is not home. I'm now living in France, and this is now my home.
So,
and I think that's really an interesting thing.
So I think, and I'm not qualified to critique or analyze literature either. But Roy, isn't that part of the point? Is that, you know, we return home in a sense of being true to ourselves. This is my home. This is who I am. If you go back to Patty's quote, is I don't know where I'm going, but I know who I want to be when I get there. That's home. And the other is I went to a new place and that became my home because I'm at home with myself there. Remember John Denver, not a philosopher, but a brilliant observer. He said, now I will misquote the song, but he said, I'm going back to a place I've never been before.
Yeah.
In other words, it becomes home because of who I am and what values I am, and I'm bringing me with me. And I think there's a positive and a negative sense of a yearning for how things were, and asking ourselves,
there.
right. And asking ourselves, why was that a good place? And frequently it's the people, it's the challenges and the accomplishments, the use of my skills to achieve something that I felt meaningful, and not that I was in a specific time, place, or role or whatever. And I think that is part of the learning, is that we ask ourselves those questions, like what is it that home is, or what is it that makes me feel like I'm valuable and content in what I'm doing.
Well, we could describe, you know, any of these journeys as the voyage of self-discovery.
Right.
Absolutely.
And interestingly enough, following up on the classical references, when Odysseus does get back to Ithaca and get back home to Penelope, nobody recognizes him. Nobody knows who he is, and he has to prove who he is by accomplishing certain things because nobody knows who he is. He's so changed.
Yeah.
And so that's another interesting little thread in those great stories. But I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, home is where the heart is, right? It's wherever you are is home to you. And that you, by going through various and sundry experiences in your life, you change somehow, you absorb, you learn, and you go on. It's still you carry that with you wherever you go, but there's also different aspects and different things that are part of you now that weren't there before. So
I think it's creating a depth of, you know, all these different experiences are creating a field or a depth that gives me much greater ability to make better decisions now. That's one thing I have noticed. And, you know, in taking these journeys and wherever they've gone, as I said, whether there's dangers, surprises, or otherwise, all of those things has created different things I can draw on now. So, as I said, the fear doesn't go away. You know, stepping into a new space, that's always been there. I still struggle with that, but it's easier now because I can pull on memories from these other things.
It's almost like, I like to refer to that as the little highway to heaven, because with every step you take, with each little adventure, you wind up increasing in your confidence and your ability to take that next step after that. And you've got to, you know, you don't have to see the whole staircase, right? You just simply need to be able to take those steps. There's also, though, this little piece of important self-awareness of really taking a look at your own personal patterns and saying, am I really taking a step, or am I just repeating a cycle, right?
Ooh.
Oh, but even if I am repeating a cycle, is it one I want to repeat? See,
this is the thing.
Yeah, is it one I want to repeat? Because sometimes there are things like, you know what, I've experienced that. I'd like to do less of that and more of this.
So I feel like, at the risk of bringing in previous references, I feel like there's an element of that is in the road less traveled by, because the road that is the beaten path and I'm talking now in an allegory or metaphorical sort of way, is I always go down this path. I can tell that path is well worn. And in many cases, it's like, why do I go down that path? I don't know, because it's the path that I always go. Or it's a pattern that I recognize, people in less than ideal circumstances by choice, meaning, I don't know, it's better than the unknown because I know this devil, right? And so I think part of it is giving ourselves permission to go down a path less traveled and say, let's see what happens here. It may not be as risky as you think, to try a new path or to perceive yourself. How'd you put it, Patty? Giving yourself permission to, now I forget how you said it. You were so brilliant.
I don't know. What did I say?
Yeah, it was brilliant. But I took it as this a little bit of self-coaching that says, no, you could do that. Public speaking, apparently public speaking is something that people fear worse than death, right? Thankfully, I remind myself of that when I speak in front of large groups. It's like some people really have struggled with this. I don't, right? But the idea that I think in some cases is like, I don't perceive myself as being able to do that. I don't perceive myself as being successful at that. I'll look like an idiot, or people will think I'm stupid, or whatever those fear things. It's like, give yourself permission, go try it. Whatever.
That's when you become the comedian and self-effacing, you see. It
works.
Well,
don't tell my secrets.
So first of all, in reference to that, Greg, the National Speakers Association, a proud member here, has a T-shirt right now. You go to the NSA store, members can buy it. It says, "Your worst fear is how I make my living."
Yeah.
I like
that. That is true, right?
Oh, we should so have that. That is just so brilliant. That's a KTLO thing too, isn't it?
Yeah,
Think about it.
It absolutely is. And,
oh my goodness.
So I would like
one little
to
piece of this we didn't talk about when we talk about home being within ourselves, and it goes everywhere we are. When we're taking a new adventure, another thing I think we need to look at is you can't run away from you.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
So right, so you have to get comfortable with you. You've got that self-awareness of, is this adventure me trying to run away from me, or is it actually a direction I'm leading myself to?
I'm running out of paper to put quotes from you on. That is,
I do both.
Really, that's really deep and insightful, to be very honest.
I always do both.
I think we all do both.
Yeah.
And,
I think there's a need.
The circumstance.
So
I think there's a need to sometimes get away from yourself because you're getting in your own way. That's another issue around that. So sometimes it's good to go, oh, I can't be me. And that's another reason why I love studio time, because studio time allows me to not really be me as such. Does that make sense?
It all melts away.
It all melts away because it has nothing to do with whatever else is around me, and it's all the other roles that people put on you.
Right.
It's like, hang on, can I take that all away? So sometimes we've got to get out of our own way. That's a good reason to run away from yourself.
So isn't part of the trying something new, trying something different, isn't part of that journey the idea of learning more about yourself? Like me in this situation where I'm really uncomfortable, that's me being me in a different context. And I've learned something about me being me in a different context. I was going to tell this story. So without the spotlight on me, because I am the butt of this joke, eventually is a friend of mine was an aspiring musician and was putting together a demo. And he said, why don't you come do some lead guitar work for me? So I got the early tracks. I practiced it. Frankly, I thought I did quite well. But we literally drove to the studio, went in, sat down, put on the headphones, and I forgot how to play guitar. All I could hear was string noise. My hand was like unable to move, and it was horrible. It was horrible. And so me here at home, or me in different contexts, I was able to play that piece. I was able to rock it. It was really quite good. And that's not just because I was listening to myself, but when the pressure was on me in a different context, I did not do a great job. And I learned something about myself. I learned a lot about myself, and it was a painful learning. I'm not featured on the track that he submitted.
You know what's interesting is all of us were 20 once, right? All of
Wow.
us were in our late
What do you mean
teens,
once? I
early
still
20s.
am.
I was born at about 35.
We're not that far away.
but-
All of
Patty,
us,
you were saying.
all of us in those early years had no problem just doing crazy things that didn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? We all did crazy things that didn't matter. And when we're on a new adventure, we have to remember that we have to give ourselves permission to be a little crazy, to not take judgment quite the same way, and feel that excitement of being a little crazy that we felt when we were in our late teens and early 20s. I think if we can take ourselves back to that, regardless of how stupid the stories might be that I was partaking in at the time, that we've done it, and we've done it without fear of retribution. So there is something in our brains that clicks as we get older into our careers that make us stop that, and we got to get past that.
I think that's part of the. Is it the glaze that someone puts over the top of us? They see us as something else, or they see us through, that lens that others see us through, and you start to become that rather than what you actually are.
But why do we care?
I know, that's my point. But I think that's why I love it. With my grandmother and stuff, just turns around and says, "Oh, I can't use the F word, can I?" What's the point? Because it's like I'm too old to care now. And I think, can't we sort of, and the kids don't care either to some degree. So there's somewhere in between where we've got to find a way of sort of breaking through those filters, I think.
Yeah.
So
I think
I'm just gonna inject here that it seems to me that what we're finding as we talk through this, that both of those different journeys are really the same journey, right? We're doing both at the same time. We're both going home to ourselves and founding a new city at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Well, and I do know that there are a lot of people that are evaluating. Well, like there's a fair number of people that don't have employment, for whatever reason, their source of income has vanished or paused during this current crisis. And after that crisis passes, which it will, who am I? What do I do? And I feel like the urgency of the need for income to pay bills and feed oneself and to not lose a home or whatever is like those are incredible stressors, and it's not unlike the epic journey that we've talked about, where some of the things you face are very real. They're not just metaphorical dangers, they're real. And people are going to get hurt. People are going to face real loss in this journey, and yet we can find ourselves in a new home. We can find ourselves back at home. We can find ourselves comfortable in this chaos or this ambiguity. And I think the biggest thing that we can take away, I'm not a philosopher, I think the biggest thing that we can take away is a new understanding of ourselves and the giving ourselves permission to see ourselves in a different context. I think that's the biggest challenge, not necessarily how do I take advantage of the technology? How do I take advantage of, hey, speakers don't go to venues anymore or whatever? I think those are part of it. But I think the biggest thing that we learn is I've now perceived myself through a different lens. What does that mean?
Let's find out.
Yeah, it may not be.
It means I have astigmatism. That's what
yes.
It means. And in way of housekeeping details, by the way, you can tweet on the hashtag KTLO Learn if you have questions or comments. And also in housekeeping details, I just wanted to make sure that you all got a chance to look at the big mic, because a couple of weeks ago, Mark Thomas joined us with his big mic. So this is revenge.
My mic's bigger than your mic.
Yes.
I don't think so, but let's not go. Anyway.
Yeah.
We had to get the big mic on camera. Just
yeah, but you know what, Roy? You've got the better voice.
Oh,
Oh,
throw down.
Throw down. Mark, I'm calling out, baby.
Don't even go there. Anyway. Anyway, I just had to sneak that on camera for a little bit just because.
Oh, I love the way it
Just
just went. It was
Yeah, have you ever noticed though, speaking of that, I mean,
when
there's
you turn into Andy Rooney.
Notice now.
we can always go to Pee Wee Herman time instead.
Have you ever noticed? That's my Dan Rather. How surprising we find when we learn a new element of somebody else, like you work with them or have a specific kind of understanding of them, and like you're a mountain climber. It's like you used to be a touring musician.
No, that's when I turn around to you and go, "You were a CIO."
Yeah. Thanks. But
turn around, Greg. I'll pull that out for you.
But I think, watch me go on. You ever notice that? That I think that's part of Patty's implied questions of why does it bother us? I think we get a sense of value around the box that we find ourselves in. I'm a CIO. I'm a service management person. I'm a whatever. And
but doesn't that all lead to acceptance? Doesn't that all lead to that one?
Do you know what it is? I find it is
desired?
that for regardless of who it is that you're with, what you're trying to find is that certain percentage of common ground so that you can begin the conversation with that person or begin the relationship with that person. But what often I find has happened, because you need to find that gray, that sort of meshy area where you sort of know something about something and you can discuss it. But from that, the conversation then needs to build out, and that's when you're supposed to have the discoveries, right? As you're sharing the knowledge, you start the discoveries. And that's where I think those filters, whatever those filters might happen to be, that's where sometimes those things get in the way. And we stop discovering that this person is a service desk person. They're not really human. Or this person's a dev person. Or this person's a sales person or a, HR. And we color them with that brush.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, you're a database admin, so you sit in some basement and speak incomprehensible language, and we'd never put you in front of a customer. Right? Whoa, that's a lot of baggage.
And I have, one of the things I have been discovering, which I absolutely love, is that many of the people that I've met, and if you get the chance, just do, I think it's on LinkedIn, #CaptureYourCommute. And it's really quite funny because, these guys have been going, well, this is how I get to and from work. And some of them are walking straight from the bedroom to the desk.
Right.
Some are making their coffee. Some actually walk out the front door on their little scooter and do the little back to the front door again.
I think that's, but isn't that what's emerging here with all the Zoom calls and with all I love the idea that we're starting to find out who people really are.
Exactly.
Not what they do. Right.
We're discovering their spaces, or we're discovering their quirks. Quirks is a good word.
Their families, their
sometimes you can't help it. They just run behind the video. And
I was in a meeting this week and it was lovely. We were chatting and someone's daughter just needed mom, and she came up. Wasn't disruptive. The meeting continued on, but she just leaned her head on her mom's shoulder. All she needed was mom. And I thought it was the neatest thing, right? It was just
bringing back the humanity to IT.
Yes, I love that.
This is what, it's that rediscovery of the human to human element again, that although we're having to do this through tech, my goodness, we're really now, I think the employers, the organizations are starting to discover, you know what, these people have other skills. These people do other things. They think in other ways other than what that job title is.
I love what that opens the door to.
It does. And that's part of this new adventure. This is part of new journeys that people can take after, when we may be allowed to be physically back together again,
So one of the kind of looking forward things that I think that we don't yet know what it really looks like is that idea that I can have multiple sources of income, if you will. I can have multiple relationships. I think that's going to become more common. And I think that we, you know, it used to be called moonlighting or whatever, and it was considered, you know, maybe not all that cool to be like being disloyal to your employer by having some other interest. Somehow in the last 10 or 15 years, it got known as the side hustle, and it went from, you know, hey, I do this on my weekends or whatever. That's kind of cool, and I'm hoping maybe I build something. To, I think even that's maturing into the idea of, you know, I understand that you're a best-selling Kindle author. I have one that reported to me in my previous role that was, and I was like, wow, that's interesting, and yet you're an excellent project manager as well. Imagine that. But the idea that that she said, I can only work so many hours a week, and if that doesn't work for you, I'm fine with that. But if you're okay with that, because I need to focus on my writing, because I am a best-selling author, which she never said she is, but she didn't say that. I'm also a project manager. I'm also a mother, and all these other things. And so being more overt with, I'm a multifaceted person, and that's okay. And I think those relationships are going to kind of explode.
I've spent a lot of the time mostly talking about, please make sure that we're referring to the person as the whole person, you know, that not all these multiple roles. I find I've always hated being pigeonholed, you know, this is the little box that you fit in. And there were points where you just want to take a hammer or whatever and just break apart whatever that box happens to be. Yeah. And so rather than talk about, well, I'm this, I am not those things. I do those things. Yeah. And I think there's a big difference between what you are and what you do. Now, obviously, they're very well linked, but I'm just trying to do a little bit of a mind shift here. But, you know, these are parts of me. It's like, oh, I'll just give you a hand. You know, how many times have we said that saying, I'll just give you a hand? Yeah. It's like, well, you can only have that piece of me, you know, and that's the thing I would really like to see a big shift in.
So actually, I'm going to yield to Roy. Roy was just getting ready to say something brilliant.
Gone.
It's gone. Yeah. I think that part of that, the interplay of what I do with who I am, I think it kind of reflects that transactional nature of employment in decades past. Is like, you hired me to be a database admin, so I'm going to be a database admin, and you really don't care if I have other skills because you need a database admin, and I'm more than happy to do that for you, right? I'm not. Don't confuse me with one, but you get the idea that I'm playing a role in exchange for a paycheck. And I think that as our relationship with who we are and what we actually do, because
Greg, I think I'm just going to take off on that before I lose this thought as well. And there's a trend going on right now in the world at large with regard to professional certifications and training, and this is titled "Keep the Learning On." So I'm going to talk about learning for a minute. And one of the things that's going on is microlearning. Mm-hmm. And in some circumstances, it's great. I need to know a specific skill for something, and I'm doing that right now for work that I do. I need to know more about this particular tool, and therefore I'm learning about this particular tool. Mm-hmm. However, in a lot of cases, we're losing sight of the big picture, which is, I know about this world.
Yeah.
You know, maybe I know this much about this, but I don't know about the world at large. And it's something that I've thought about for a long, long time. And I call it digital versus analog thinking. Analog thinking is the watch that has a face and it goes around and you have 2 12-hour periods. It gives you a picture of where you are in the day, right? Looking at those hands tells you, oh, I'm that much through that 12-hour period. Looking at a digital clock tells you it's 12:42. That's it. It
no
doesn't
context.
There's no context, no relationship to the rest of the day. Same thing with GPS versus a map. You look at a map, you can see the relationships between different places, the distances to and from. If you look at GPS, it tells you, here you are, go there, make a right turn, go that, do that. And it's a different way of looking at the world. Sometimes the one is better than the other, and sometimes the other one is better. And I think we go through our world thinking about that, but let's keep the learning on. And it doesn't only mean for these little bits of micro learning. We have to step back and look at the canvas as a whole. You can't just paint that leaf, as you were talking about before, Pat. You can't just, might be very good at painting that leaf, but what relationship to the entire painting does that leaf bear when you back up?
Right.
Is it proportional?
That's where you see the light and the shadow and the
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you don't look at a bit of the bigger picture, you don't see that. And I have some concern that we're tending toward the micro rather than the macro, and we'll see where that all goes.
Something you mentioned there by, you know, having the leaf in relationship to whatever it is on the canvas as well. There's another thing that you know, and musicians have the same thing, knowing when to leave space.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, you don't, as you said, I think with the micro learning, we have this tendency to just fill all the spaces in. We're going to fill all those minutes. We're going to fill all those spaces. And that's dangerous. We've got to allow, sometimes you have to leave some of the canvas blank.
I'll tell you a Roy story here. And as you folks know, but probably a lot of other people don't, I was, in fact, a professional musician for a lot of years. And when I was a kid, probably 16, 17 years old, there was a famous guitar player who was in the same guitar shop as me. Was a frequent customer. I was a frequent customer, and I ran into him multiple times. I won't mention his name, but he's one of those people that's absolutely mind-blowingly good. But when he was really young, at that age, he had convinced himself that what he had to do was play every note on the guitar all the time. And so one day he's sitting on top of an amplifier in the guitar shop. And this
Fly to the bumblebee.
Goes on for a couple of minutes, and the owner of the store, who was Serbian, is watching him, and finally he just yells right at this guitar player's face, "Take a breath." And so he was saying, give the note space. And actually that was a skill that this guitar player learned later on, and it improved his playing very much. So I have one more thing that I'm going to sneak in here through the side door. And I would just like to say that, you know, we're talking about this journey and how to start, where do we start? One of the things that tends to move us along the journey, and we talked early on in a couple of conversations ago about being uncomfortable before we start. Maybe confusion is one of the things that starts us on the journey. And I'm just going to quote, going back to the epic poetry, Dante. And I'm going to quote it in the original Renaissance Italian. The opening scene of Dante's Inferno is when he awakens. And it's nel mezzo del cammin della nostra vita mi ritrovai in una selva oscura. And what that means is in the middle of the way of my life. So right in the middle of my life, I wake up in this foggy, obscure wood. And at that point, he doesn't even know where the path is, or if there is a path. And I think that's the beginning of deciding where, how, what. And I have to get up, I have to move, and, you know, as you say, Patty, take an action. So that's my parting thought for today. Greg, you're on.
So if I could impart my wisdom, I would say that part of that journey is a journey of, I don't want to use self-awareness because it sounds, you know, kind of soft, but emotional intelligence is an incredible thing. It allows us to get past the noise of a lot of notes. And I might have been a guitarist that played a lot of notes at one point in time, and listening and pulling back and looking for spaces to not play and to not be. And for me, tying back to emotional intelligence is, how am I feeling and why might I be feeling that way? As opposed to, this is annoying, you're being bad, whatever. Is like, I ask myself, what am I actually feeling here and why? And that's, I guess, one of my journeys.
Mine is when you're running through and you're terrified, just remember life is an endless supply of mulligans.
Oh, I so love the Irish.
Do-overs.
Yeah, do-overs. I love it.
I love it.
I'll leave you. You know, I've worked a lot in the Polynesian healing systems, and one of my favorite things is looking at the 7 Huna principles. They help me quite a lot. And I think when it comes to the adventurer's journey, although they sort of, there's EK, the world is what you think it is. Kala is there are no limits, everything is possible. So just believing in the possibilities. But one of my absolute favorites is Makia, which is energy flows where attention goes. And I think that's quite a powerful thing. Put your focus where you want to be heading and take that step.
Awesome stuff, guys. This is a lovely conversation, and I'm so privileged to be able to hang out with you all and have these conversations. We'll be back next Friday.
Next Friday,
and
KTLO.
Hope you join us and send us a tweet or two. Love questions and comments. So there you go.
Yeah. Get on that KTLO hashtag.